even the daughter of Jacob and Leah could end up going out and getting raped. This could happen to your daughter too. But don't judge the parents and actually don't judge Dinah, because we must remember that Dinah's nature was like that of a male who is in the habit of going out into the field. When you have people who come from religious backgrounds, what they actually do is they express these ideas in explicitly religious terms. In effect, what they're doing is saying the quiet part out loud. First thing is that if Yitzchak did have a female soul, it's pretty clear that this person is not a transgender person who realizes that they have a female soul and then they come out and they transition and they put on a dress. Welcome to Kol Isha, the podcast of heterodox Jewish women. I'm your host, Shira Solomons, an economist turned Rebbitzin on a quest to reconcile liberal values with feminist ideals and a commitment to Judaism and Jewish law in a secular world plagued by irrational ideologies. Today I'm going to play for you the first half of a Zoom shiur or lecture that I did on Sunday. The topic was trans biblical characters in Jewish tradition. The disturbing origin of oft-quoted religious narratives of gendered souls. Queer teachers such as Abby Stein have sought religious foundations in Judaism for the idea of true trans, that some people are born in the wrong body or with a soul of the opposite sex. They do this by appealing to narratives in Luriana Kabbalah to do with reincarnation and by projecting trans identities onto biblical characters, such as Joseph, Dinah, Isaac, and Michal. Such narratives have been promoted by organizations such as Kashet, the Jewish LGBT charity, whose judgment in promoting these texts must be questioned. I've explored the texts behind these arguments, including quite a bit of halakha, Jewish legal texts, to do with Michal's tefillin. You'll see why in part 2. If you're listening to this solely on audio, I strongly recommend that you go to the show notes and click the link to my Substack where you can watch a video version of this, because I'm going to speak quite quickly and there are a lot of slides and you really do need to see the slides. Alternatively, there's another link where you can download the slideshow and flip through that while you listen. If you enjoyed this, please do like and subscribe on my Substack and let me know what you think. There's a comment section. You can post. You don't need to be a paid subscriber to post. In fact, my Substack is completely free. So please do let me know what you think and engage in conversation with other listeners. Enjoy. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. I want to talk to you about trans-biblical characters in the Jewish tradition, the disturbing origin of oft-quoted religious narratives of gendered souls. This is basically a repeat with some adjustments of a session that I presented at Limud Festival in December. The difference tonight is that I've got a bit more time, so I will be able to add some things in which I had to leave out in December. And the other thing is that I won't have to self-censor necessarily in the same way that I had to at Limud. Because the thing about this topic is that some people might find it a bit offensive. In fact, I'm going to give a content warning at the beginning, which actually that you will be offended by this content. If you're not offended by it, there's probably something wrong. The whole point actually of this whole enterprise is to look at these materials, warts and all, because they tend to often be presented in a sugar-coated way to make them appear to be a lot more acceptable than they probably are. So there are a lot of characters in the Bible that there've been narratives bouncing about for a number of years about characters in the Bible who apparently had souls of the opposite sex. And these include Yitzchak, otherwise known as Isaac, and Michal, Yosef, otherwise known as Joseph, and Dinah. There are minor mentions about people like Moses, the daughters of Tzlachad, Yael of the tent peg. If you want to read up on them, there are links to that in the source sheet, which I will stick into the chat towards the end, so you can look all that up, and it'll all be posted with the Substack post, all the links to all of that. But I'm going to focus on these four characters, primarily on Yitzchak and Michal, because they are the most interesting. You might ask why do we want to look at this sort of thing? Why is this relevant? And and the reason is that if we look at the gender critical world at the moment, um, there are a lot of people celebrating with Trump that he's going to abolish gender identity ideology, but you can't abolish an ideology. And a lot of people have become more aware that you have to actually deal with these ideas as religious ideas, because they really are religious ideas, and religious ideas require religious answers. And ideally, these religious answers should not be coming out of right field and just be saying, oh, boys should be boys, girls should be girls. Let's go back the way that things used to be. That's not necessarily a solution either. But if you look at the gender movement, there is a religious element to the whole idea of gender identity and of transgender. If you look on the Stonewall website, the whole way that trans is defined, it's a person who has a gender that is not the same as or doesn't sit comfortably with the sex they were assigned at birth. In other words, there's this thing called a gender that people have, as opposed to the way that I would put it, where gender is a label, is language. Here, gender is a thing. It is essential. It exists. And when a person realizes that their gender isn't the same as their sex, they do this thing called coming out, where they reveal that they are trans. And from this narrative, people transition because they are trans, as opposed to that transitioning is what makes them trans. It's an essential quality. So you have to have a religious answer to these religious ideas. And actually, what happens is when you have people who come from religious backgrounds, what they actually do is they express these ideas in explicitly religious terms. In effect, what they're doing is saying the quiet part out loud. And you see this in Jewish speakers, that there are similar things going on within Christianity, and also within the Quaker movement, where you have explicit religious narratives to do with transgender, people finding trans characters in the New Testament. It's a real thing within religions. So within Judaism, what you have is people seeking support from Midrash and Kabbalah for the idea that one can be, quote unquote, born with the soul of the opposite sex. And you can see this on the Keshet website, particularly the main, most important speaker promoting this is somebody called Abby Stein, who came to Limud a few years ago. He's the author of a book called Becoming Eve, because of course Abby was not born, Chava, and it has an upcoming book called Sources of Pride. And there was an interview that Stein did in 2019. There's a link in the handout in the PowerPoint, which you can look up. And Stein refers to a text, a Kabbalistic text called Shar HaGilgulim by Chaim Vital, and how this played a formative part in Stein's journey to become a trans woman. And the key quote in that interview is, at times a male will reincarnate in the body of a female, and a female would be in a male. And Stein describes reading this text and bursting into tears and having this a moment of realization. I am not crazy. There are people in Jewish tradition who have been like me, and this led Stein to transition and find a Jewish foundation for transitioning. But these ideas have also been quoted by more mainstream sources. Orthodox Union Rabbi Jack Abramovitz, who is the Torah content editor of the Orthodox Union on their website, or at least he was a few years ago, and the International Network of Orthodox Mental Health Professionals, citing these ideas as being helpful. So here you got Jack Abramovitz saying, if we wouldn't judge Dina or Michal for having a male soul, we shouldn't judge our contemporaries who face similar challenges. In other words, because there are characters in the Bible who had these transgender souls, you should therefore have compassion on people today who are transgender, just like these characters in the Bible. So how do we then respond to these texts? So there are a number of questions that we should ask. The first is, do these narratives of soul of the opposite sex, born trans, do these narratives really fit this idea of being born trans or having a gender different from your sex? Secondly, I mean, people are always projecting narratives onto text. We do this all the time. Lots of midrash is trying to see meaning in text from our point of view. That's all very well, but whether or not this is a projection that might be a bit of a stretch, which of course is something people do, the question is it good? Is it progressive? Are these narratives feminist? Should we be celebrating these narratives? And are we sufficiently critical of the scholars who find inspiration in these narratives? Or are we giving people a free pass because we are viewing them as being part of a marginalized group? So let's look a bit at these biblical personalities with opposite sex souls. We're going to focus primarily on Isaac, Yitzchak, and on Michal. I'm going to briefly whiz through Yosef and Dinah, and there's a source sheet with all the other sources about people like Moses. There's a lot of material here, and I can't go through all properly. So, with respect to Dinah and Yosef, the thing about Dinah and Yosef, they are a brother and sister. They're conceived at about the same time. Dinah is the only daughter of Leah and Jacob, and Yosef is the daughter of Rachel and Jacob. Rachel and Leah are sisters and both wives of Jacob, who wanted to marry Rachel but ended up marrying four women, Rachel and Leah, and also the two maidservants. At this point, where Leah gets pregnant, Leah already has six sons. The maidservants each have two sons, which means we have 10 sons together. According to the midrash, this is in the Talmud Brachot, and there's a similar midrash in Beishit Rabbah. Leah and or Rachel understand that there are meant to be 12 tribes of Israel, which means that if Leah has another son, Rachel can only have one tribe descended from her because Rachel has not yet given birth to a child. So in Brachot, Leah prays to God. She passes judgment on herself. That's how Dinah gets her name. And Leah's child miraculously transforms from a male child to a female child. So Dinah is born as a female when originally was male. And as a result, then Rachel is able to then have when Rachel has Yosef, Yosef is a son. And this idea that somehow there's an embryo swap, although this is the way it's put about in sort of queer midrash world, but actually, if you look at the text, it's really the sex is changing of Leah's baby, and then Rachel's baby is born separately. But as a result of this narrative, you get these ideas of both Yosef and Dinah being trans or having souls of the opposite sex. There's somebody called Jericho Vincent who describes these people as being our transcestors. Now, certainly there are similarities between Dinah and Yosef because they are both gender non-conforming characters in the Bible, and they both have a hard time, and they both experience abuse, even sexual abuse. So with Dinah, the core text is her going out. By Tate Dinah, she went out to visit the daughters of the land, an unusual thing for a good girl to do because good girls stay at home or go out with a chaperone. And she is raped and she is held captive. And then she is rescued very violently by her brothers, Shimon and Levi, who massacre the residents of Shechem, where she has been held hostage. And the this story then leads Rabbi Eliyahu Monk. He's writing in the 17th century, so that's more than 1,000 years after Bereshit Rabbah and the Talmud. These two stories about this embryo switch, but he latches onto this embryo switch story and uses it to create, number one, a moral, which is parents, watch out, keep an eye on your daughters, because if even the daughter of Jacob and Leah could end up going out and getting raped, this could happen to your daughter too. But don't judge the parents, and don't judge Dinah, because we must remember that Dinah's nature was like that of a male who is in the habit of going out into the field, and this is how she conducted herself. It's basically understand Dina's gender nonconformity comes from her male nature because she originally was meant to be male and she would end up being female. Make of it what you want. There are a number of different ways to interpret this. One is that you've got a certain amount of empathy, a man realizing that women can have a nature which is typically masculine, and that can then create dangers for them, as opposed to that behaving that way is somehow sinful. It's more that she creates danger for herself because she does a dangerous thing that possibly would have been perfectly fine if she had been male and not vulnerable to being raped. So that's Dinah. So now there's Yosef. The thing about Yosef, there actually are no classical texts suggesting that Yosef had a female soul. This is really being projected onto him. It's said a lot. There isn't actually any evidence for it because if you remember the story about the embryo change, it's Leah's embryo which is changing. As a result, Rachel can have a boy. But I have not found actual text where the embryo of Yosef changes from a female to male. However, he is a gender non-conforming character in a number of ways. One is that he's the only male in the Bible that is shapely and beautiful. He says, "He Yosef yefei Torah b'fei mar'eh." It's the same wording that's used about beautiful women. He's the only one. He also experiences sexual harassment, which is something that normally happens only to women. And Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him. He resists her, and as a result, enters prison. And he is violently sold into slavery by his brothers, who strip him of this ketonet pasim, coat of many colors, or ornamented tunic is stripped from him, and he is sold into slavery. But there isn't actually any text really saying that he was female in any real sense. But if you want to understand how it is that some of these trans or queer writers view Yosef as being trans, they use two arguments. One is looking at this tunic, this ketonet pasim, because there's only one other character in the Bible who has a ketonet pasim, and that is a woman, a princess, Tamar, daughter of David. This is not the same Tamar who seduced Yehuda. This is Tamar in the book of Samuel. And she has a ketonet pasem. So Jericho Vincent suggests that this is a princess dress, and that shows how feminine Yosef is. But if you actually look at the book of Samuel, what happens to Tamar is she is raped by her brother Amnon, and then she tears up her ketonet pasim. And this seems to be an allusion to Yosef and the violence that Yosef experiences, that she is tearing up her tunic, and not necessarily, it's more about Tamar than it is about Yosef. That's the first source that's used. The second source that's used has to do with Bereshit Rabbah, the Midrash on the book of Genesis, with the story of Yosef and the way that Potiphar's wife attempts to coerce him to have sex with her. And the Midrash looks at the phrase the Ein Ish. There was no other man in the household, so Yosef is there left alone with this woman who's got the hots for him, because of course he's so beautiful. And the Bereshit Rabbah says Badak et atzmo v'lo matza atzmo ish. He examined himself and did not find himself to be a man. Ish. It's taking that word ish. If you look further in the text, it shows what it means by that, which is that he loses his sexual ardor. Literally, the semen comes out from his fingernails. So you can imagine what they're talking about here. But Jericho Vincent interprets this as that he realized that he wasn't a man. I find this a real stretch. I don't really think that there's any real substance here to the idea that Yosef may have been female in any sense. So, but when it comes to Dina, there is definitely something there, but it's about gender nonconformity and trying to explain away her behavior to justify why she may have behaved in a way that otherwise would have been deemed inappropriate. So that's Yosef and Dina. Yitzchak and Michal are going to be a lot more interesting. Then we're going to really get into the Kabbalistic stuff. So let's move on to Yitzchak, and I'm trying to keep sort of 2 pages on the side for those that so that you can keep track because I'm flipping through the slides quite quickly. So this is the text, which one of the 2 texts, which was influential on Abby Stein. And in fact, if you look at the front cover of the book about to come out by Abby Stein, this is the text to do with Yitzchak having a feminine soul that is on the cover. I recognized it. I was like, oh yeah. So there is, I'm going to move down to the full text because Stein does the typical thing that Stein does. If you look at all of the times that Stein quotes these texts, is that Stein will cherry pick and avoid translating the offensive bits. So I've got the full text here with all the bits that maybe Stein didn't want to be there, to look at what's really here in this text to do with Yitzchak. So Yitzchak. So there's this text by Rabbi Yechiel Michael of Zlotchov. It's citing another text called the Or HaChaim, which we'll look at in a minute. And it's looking at Yitzchak and the idea that he may have had a female soul, be born with a female soul. What's going on here has to do with the story of Yitzchak and Rivka, because if you know the story, Rivka gets married. She's probably a teenager. And 20 years later, she finally manages to get pregnant. And she only gets pregnant when, very unusually, Yitzchak prays to God that she should be able to conceive. Yitzchak is the only man in the entire Bible there's a lot of onlys here. Yitzchak is the only man in the entire Bible to pray to God that his wife should be able to conceive. Other men, when their wives can't conceive, find another solution, which is to take another wife. But Yitzchak won't do that. He loves Rivka. Or perhaps another interpretation. So the idea in Rabbi Yechiel Michael of Zlotchov is that Yitzchak was born with only a soul from the female realm, and a soul from the female realm is incapable of impregnating. It doesn't have that male power. And it was through the merit of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, that Yitzchak obtained a soul from the male realm that could impregnate. Because 2 females cannot procreate you have to have a male element there. And so what happened was that Isaac changed his soul from female to male. And this prayer to God achieved that result that Rivka got pregnant. Right. Now, Rabbi Yechiel Michael of Zlotchov is citing another text, which is the Or HaChaim. The Or HaChaim, where the Or HaChaim gets the idea of this change of soul from female to male from a single word, and the word is lizkunav. So it says in Genesis, when Sarah gets pregnant, Batar v'telet Sarah laHavraham ben lizkunav. Sarah got pregnant and gave birth to a son for Avraham, lizkunav, in his old age. But lizkunav, it's a very strange word because if you were going to say in his old age, what you would normally say is lizkunato, in his old age. But lizkunav sounds like in his old ages. It sounds like a plural. From this, the Or HaChaim suggests that Yitzchak was actually born in two ages of Abraham. Number one, he was born, and number two, he was born a second time. In the merit of the Akedah, he gets his male soul later. And that is how Yitzchak ended up becoming fertile, and Rivka was able to get pregnant. So this idea of Yitzchak having had a female soul is emphasized by quite a few these sort of queer writers. One particular person, Jay Mickelson, is cited by Abby Stein. Abby Stein cites something else, but this particular quote really jumped out at me, which is Isaac's feminine strength lies in his ability to submit and to exist within the power dynamics dictated by the Akedah role play. So this it's kind of freaky, a bit BDSM, the idea that Yitzchak is sort of submitting. However, it's not out of keeping with the Kabbalistic idea of the Avot, because you do have this idea of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov representing the three Sfirot, Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet. Chesed, the masculine attribute of kindness, is Avraham. Gevurah, the feminine attribute of restraint, is Yitzchak, and those are then synthesized into Tiferet for Yaakov. And the idea that Yitzchak has this feminine quality of being passive, is his passiveness is there are more stories where Yitzchak is passive. So for example, the way that he just sort of goes along with it when Rivka creates this scenario with the birthright being given to Yaakov and not to Esav. It's not so ridiculous to do this, but it's still weird. So what have we learned from Yitzchak? First thing is that if Yitzchak did have a female soul, it's pretty clear that it's not a female soul that was affirmed. This person is not a transgender person who realizes that they have a female soul and then they come out and they transition and they put on a dress. I don't see how a anybody who is a trans woman or trans identified male should find Yitzchak as any kind of model for their trans experience. Rather, what's going on here is that the femaleness of Yitzchak is a lack of maleness. It is a physical defect. Isaac transforms from an inadequate boy with a female soul. He becomes a proper man who can procreate through the merit of the Akedah. And what's going on here is I think there's a bit of confusion that people have to do with this whole idea of what a soul is. So there are many, soul is an English word. There are many different words in Hebrew corresponding to soul, but the one used in these texts is the word nefesh. And nefesh doesn't mean the ethereal soul that separates from the body and goes to heaven. A nefesh is a life. We talk about saving a life, pekuach nefesh. It's breath, it's the life force. When the nefesh leaves the guf, the body is the guf. When the nefesh departs from the guf becomes inanimate, becomes dead, because it's not got any nefesh, any life in it. And so this nefesh, this life force, is here actually sexual, that the male nefesh is that male sexual power which Yitzchak is lacking and then gets. It's physical. It isn't something ethereal and otherworldly. And you have to really ask the question whether this whole gender sex dualism idea actually fits the Jewish idea of a soul. I actually don't think it does. Anyway, that's Yitzchak. Now we're going to move to Michal. So I'm actually going to leave it there, and you'll have to come back next week to hear the rest, because the analysis of Michal takes more time than the analysis of all the characters put together, and it's extremely interesting, and I don't want you to be exhausted when you listen to it. So that will be in the next episode. And if you want to hear that, please do go to the show notes and like and subscribe, and then you won't miss an episode. Thank you for listening to Heterodox Jewish Woman. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.